Billionaire CEO falls in love at first sight with the kind hotel receptionist. A tale of unexpected love, deception, and redemption. A powerful billionaire, Brian Rodriguez, who built his empire with his bare hands, finds himself captivated by a kind-hearted hotel receptionist, Jessica Brown. But in the world of wealth and power, love isn't always simple. Will their love survive secrets, betrayal, and the forces trying to keep them apart? Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this growing community. Your support, comments, and engagement mean the world to me. You are the reason we continue to create these stories, and I hope they bring you joy, inspiration, and maybe even a little bit of hope. We spend hours creating these videos to share valuable lessons about love, humility, and kindness. One of my greatest hopes is that these stories touch lives across the world. If you're watching from any part of the world, drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where this story is reaching. Now let's get into today's story, one filled with unexpected love, betrayal, and redemption. Brian Rodriguez stepped into the lobby of the Royal Crest Hotel, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, a sound that echoed faintly amidst the hum of New York City luxury. The air carried the subtle scent of jasmine and wealth, a world he'd long grown accustomed to dominating. At 38, he was a billionaire CEO whose name commanded boardrooms and headlines alike, a man who thrived on control, until this moment. Exhaustion clung to him after a brutal 12-hour flight, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his dark hair tousled from restless attempts to sleep. He dragged his suitcase forward, eyes scanning the opulent space, when they landed on her. Jessica Brown stood behind the front desk, her presence a quiet flame in the midst of the lobby's grandeur. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands framing her face, and her hazel eyes sparkled with a kindness that felt foreign to Brian's calculated existence. She looked up from her work, meeting his gaze with a smile that hit him like a jolt of electricity, soft, genuine, and utterly disarming. "Welcome to Royal Crest Hotel, Mr. Rodriguez. How may I assist you today?" Her voice was warm, laced with a sincerity that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. He froze, words evaporating from his mind. This wasn't like him. Brian Rodriguez didn't stumble. He didn't falter. Yet here he was, staring at this woman as if the world had tilted off its axis. A room. I need a room," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. She laughed softly, a sound that danced through the air and lodged itself somewhere deep inside him. "Of course, sir. Do you have a reservation?" He blinked, shaking off the haze that had settled over him. "Number. But I don't mind waiting for one if it means I get to keep talking to you." The words slipped out before he could stop them, bold and unfiltered, qualities that had built his empire but rarely surfaced in moments like this. Jessica's cheeks flushed a delicate pink, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she ducked her head, busying herself with the computer. She had no idea who he was, no clue that the man standing before her could buy this hotel 10 times over without blinking. To her, he was just another guest, albeit one with a disarmingly intense stare and a voice that seemed to linger in the air. "Let me see what I can do," she said, her fingers tapping swiftly across the keyboard. "We're pretty booked up with the conference, but I might be able to find something." She glanced up at him, catching the way his gaze hadn't wavered. "Long trip?" "Too long," he replied, leaning casually against the counter, though his pulse betrayed the calm he projected. "You ever get tired of dealing with people like me? Rich, impatient, probably a little rude." Her lips curved into a playful smile. "Only when they forget to say please." He chuckled, a low, genuine sound that surprised even him. "Fair enough. Please then. Find me a room, Jessica. Her name rolled off his tongue like he'd been saying it for years, plucked from the small name tag pinned to her uniform. She tilted her head, amused. You're quick. Most people don't bother with the name tag. Most people don't pay attention, he countered, his voice dropping slightly. I do. The air between them thickened, a thread of something unspoken pulling taut. Jessica cleared her throat, refocusing on the screen. Good news, Mr. Rodriguez. I've got a suite available on the top floor. It's not usually open this week, but I can make an exception. Brian, he corrected, his tone firm yet gentle. Call me Brian. Okay. Brian. She hesitated, as if testing the weight of his name. I'll need a moment to get this processed. Can I have your ID and a card? He slid both across the counter, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. The contact sent a spark through him, sharp and undeniable. He watched her work, noting the way she bit her lip in concentration, the way her brow furrowed ever so slightly. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a depth to her, a quiet strength that intrigued him, pulling him in like gravity. So, Jessica, he began, unable to stop himself, how does someone like you end up working a desk in a place like this? She glanced up, surprised by the question. Someone like me? Kind, real, not jaded by all this. He gestured vaguely at the glittering chandeliers and the parade of wealthy guests drifting through the lobby. Her smile faltered for a moment, a shadow passing over her expression before she masked it. It's a job, pays the bills, and I like helping people, even the rich, impatient ones. She handed his cards back, her tone light but her eyes guarded. He wanted to press, to peel back that fleeting layer of mystery, but a voice interrupted them. Jess, you're needed in the back. A harried co-worker poked her head out from a side door, exasperation etched on her face. Jessica sighed, offering Brian an apologetic look. Duty calls. Your keys ready. Suite 4201. Elevators to your left. If you need anything, just ring the desk. Anything? He asked, a teasing edge to his voice as he took the key. Within reason, she shot back, already stepping away. But she paused, glancing over her shoulder. Enjoy your stay, Brian. He watched her go, the sway of her step drawing his attention, until she disappeared behind the door. For a moment he stood there, key in hand, feeling oddly unmoored. He'd met thousands of people, presidents, tycoons, celebrities, and none had ever left him this rattled. What was it about her? As he headed toward the elevator, his phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. Meeting with Grayson pushed to tomorrow. He's dodging again. Brian's jaw tightened. Grayson Enterprises was the last hurdle in his latest acquisition, a deal worth billions, and the old man was playing hard to get. Normally, Brian would have been strategizing, plotting his next move. But now his mind drifted back to Jessica, her smile, her laugh, the way she'd said his name. The elevator doors slid shut, and he leaned against the wall, staring at his reflection in the polished metal. He was a man who got what he wanted, always. And right now he wanted to know more about her. But as the floors ticked by, a flicker of doubt crept in. She didn't know who he was, didn't know the power he wielded, the shadows that trailed him. What would she think if she did? Back at the desk, Jessica returned from calming Mrs. Carter, her co-worker nudging her with a grin. That guy was totally into you. Did you see how he looked at you? Stop it, Lisa, Jessica muttered, though her cheeks warmed again. He's just a guest. A guest who couldn't take his eyes off you, Lisa teased. Bet he's some big shot, too. You should have seen his suit. Jessica shook her head, dismissing it, but a small part of her wondered. There'd been something in his gaze, something intense, almost searching. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the next guest. She had no time for daydreams. Her life was steady, predictable, safe. At least it had been until today. Up in his suite, Brian dropped his bag and crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he'd already conquered. But his thoughts weren't on the deal or the empire he'd built. They were on her. He pulled out his phone, hesitating before typing a quick message to his assistant. Find out everything you can about a Jessica Brown. Works at Royal Crest Hotel. He hit send, a slow smile tugging at his lips. This wasn't just curiosity. It was a chase, and Brian Rodriguez never lost. Meanwhile, in the hotel's staff room, Jessica sat on a worn couch during her break, staring at a text she'd received hours earlier but hadn't opened until now. We need to talk. It's about Mom. Her brother's words stared back at her, heavy with unspoken weight. She closed her eyes, dread pooling in her stomach. Whatever it was, it couldn't be good. Not after everything they'd been through. The clock ticked on, the first hour of their story drawing to a close, but the threads of tension were only beginning to tighten. Brian, a man used to winning, had set his sights on something he couldn't buy. Jessica, a woman hiding more than she let on, had no idea her world was about to collide with his. And somewhere in the city, a storm was gathering, one neither of them could see coming. Jessica slipped back behind the front desk, smoothing her uniform as the chaos of Mrs. Carter's complaints faded into the background. The lobby hummed with its usual rhythm, guests gliding through, the soft clink of glasses from the bar, the occasional burst of laughter. But her mind lingered on Brian Rodriguez. His voice, low and deliberate, echoed in her ears, and that fleeting brush of his fingers against hers replayed in her thoughts. She shook her head, chiding herself. He was just a guest. A charming one, sure, but still just a guest. The phone at the desk buzzed, pulling her back to reality. She answered with her practiced warmth. Royal Crest Hotel, how may I assist you? A guest on the line needed extra towels, routine, grounding. She dispatched the request to housekeeping, her hands moving on autopilot. Yet, as she hung up, her gaze drifted to the elevator where Brian had disappeared. What was it about him? That intensity in his eyes, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite place. Upstairs, Brian paced his suite, the city skyline glittering beyond the glass like a prize he'd already claimed. The room was pristine, extravagant, everything he was used to. Marble floors, a king-sized bed draped in silk, a mini-bar stocked with bottles that cost more than most people's rent. But his focus wasn't on the luxury. It was on her. Jessica. He dropped onto the leather sofa, running a hand through his hair, replaying their exchange. That smile of hers, it wasn't polished or rehearsed like the ones he encountered in his world. It was real, and it had hooked him deep. His phone vibrated on the table, snapping him out of his reverie. A reply from his assistant. On it. Jessica Brown, huh? Any specifics to narrow it down? Brian smirked, typing back, receptionist, Royal Crest. That's all you need. He tossed the phone aside, leaning back with a restless energy. Normally, he'd be dissecting the Grayson deal, plotting how to corner the elusive CEO into submission. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere, tangled in hazel eyes and a laugh that felt like sunlight. He stood, restless, and grabbed his keycard. He wasn't tired, not anymore. The jet lag that had weighed him down was gone, replaced by a buzzing curiosity. He needed to see her again. Not tomorrow, not by chance, now. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and headed back to the lobby, a man on a mission he couldn't fully explain. Downstairs, Jessica was mid-conversation with a frazzled guest when Brian reappeared. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on calming the woman who'd lost her reservation confirmation. "Don't worry, ma'am, we'll sort this out," she said, her tone steady and soothing. "Let me pull up the system. It'll just take a moment." The guest huffed but nodded, and Jessica's fingers flew across the keyboard, her calm a stark contrast to the woman's agitation. Brian lingered near a pillar, watching her work. She handled the situation with a grace that fascinated him, patient, unruffled, kind. He'd seen people crumble under less pressure, yet here she was, a quiet force holding the chaos at bay. When the guest finally walked away, placated, Jessica let out a small breath, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That's when she saw him. "Mr. Rodriguez." "Brian," she corrected herself, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Is everything okay with the suite?" "Perfect," he said, stepping closer, his hands in his pockets to mask the nervous energy coursing through him. "Just had a few questions." She raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement tugging at her lips. "Questions? I thought I covered everything." "You did," he admitted, flashing a grin that usually closed deals and melted resistance. "But I'm thorough, too. Humor me." She chuckled, the sound light and unguarded, and it hit him all over again. How much he wanted to hear it, over and over. "All right, what's on your mind?" He leaned against the counter, casual but deliberate, his gaze locked on hers. "The room service menu. How's the steak?" Her eyes sparkled with playful skepticism. "You came all the way down here to ask about the steak?" "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to talk to you," he said, his voice dipping lower, testing the waters. Her cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze, professional yet intrigued. "It's excellent. Cooked to order, paired with a red wine reduction. Anything else?" "Yeah," he pressed, undeterred. "The gym, open 24 hours. "It is," she nodded, leaning slightly forward as if drawn into the game. "Though most guests don't hit the treadmill at midnight." "I'm not most guests," he replied, a spark of challenge in his tone. "No," she agreed, her smile softening. "You're not." The air between them crackled, a quiet tension building with each exchange. Brian felt it. The pull, the thrill of her matching his rhythm without even realizing it. He was a man who never waited, who bent the world to his will. Yet here he was, prolonging a conversation about nothing just to stay in her orbit. "What about the pool?" he asked, grasping for another thread to keep her talking. "Also 24 hours, she said, chuckling again. "Sir, I think I've given you all the details you need." "Just making sure," he countered, grinning wider. "You're very thorough, Miss Brown." "Jessica," she corrected, mirroring his earlier move. "And I try to be. Keeps the guests happy." "Consider me happy," he said, his voice softening, the flirtation giving way to something more genuine. "You're good at this, making people feel seen." Her smile faltered just for a heartbeat, a flicker of something deeper crossing her face, surprise, maybe vulnerability, before she recovered. "It's my job," she said simply, though her tone carried a weight he couldn't decipher. He wanted to ask more, to dig into that fleeting crack in her armor, but a group of conference attendees approached the desk, their loud chatter shattering the moment. Jessica straightened, slipping back into her role. "Duty calls again," she said, offering him a small, apologetic smile. "Enjoy the steak, Brian." He stepped back, nodding, but didn't leave. Instead, he lingered near the bar, ordering a drink he didn't want, his eyes drifting back to her as she handled the new guests with the same effortless warmth. He sipped the whiskey, barely tasting it, his mind racing. This wasn't like him, hovering, waiting. He was Brian Rodriguez, the man who made decisions, who took what he wanted without hesitation. Yet here he was, tethered to this spot by a woman he'd known for less than an hour. An hour ticked by, the lobby thinning as the night deepened. Jessica finished her shift, grabbing her coat from the back and stepping out from behind the desk. Brian watched her, debating whether to approach again when his phone buzzed. Another text from his assistant. "Jessica Brown, 29. Lives in Brooklyn. No major red flags. Family info sparse. Mother deceased, brother in the city. Want more? Brian's jaw tightened. Sparse. That word gnawed at him. There was more to her, layers he couldn't yet reach. She crossed the lobby, unaware of his gaze, her steps quick but weary. As she passed the bar, their eyes met for a split second, just long enough for her to offer a shy wave before disappearing through the revolving doors. Brian's grip tightened on his glass. He could follow her, charm her into a late-night coffee, but something stopped him. Not yet. This wasn't a deal to close in one night. It was different. Back in his suite, he stood at the window again, the city restless below. His phone buzzed once more, Grayson's team requesting a breakfast meeting. Work beckoned, but his thoughts stayed on Jessica. He'd see her again tomorrow, he decided. He'd make sure of it. Meanwhile, Jessica stepped onto the subway, the rumble of the train drowning out the noise in her head. She pulled out her phone, staring at her brother's text again. "We need to talk." "It's about Mom." Her stomach twisted. Mom was gone. Had been for years, so what could this be? She typed a reply. "Tomorrow. I'm off at 3, and hit send, her fingers trembling. Whatever it was, it felt like a storm on the horizon, one she wasn't ready to face. The train sped through the dark, carrying her toward Brooklyn, while Brian stood in his tower, gazing out at a city that suddenly felt too small to contain the questions burning in his chest. 2 hours had passed since their first meeting, and already the threads of their lives were knotting together, tight, tangled, and teetering on the edge of something neither could predict. A billionaire who never waited had found someone worth waiting for, and a receptionist with secrets of her own had caught the eye of a man who'd stop at nothing to uncover them. The night stretched on, heavy with promise and peril, leaving them both suspended in a story that was only just beginning. Brian lingered in the bar longer than he intended, the ice in his whiskey melting into a puddle as the clock ticked past midnight. The lobby beyond the glass walls had quieted, the last stragglers from the conference stumbling to their rooms, but he couldn't shake her. Jessica. Her voice, her laugh, the way she'd held his gaze without flinching, it looped through his mind, relentless. He wasn't a man who lingered on anything or anyone. But here he was, rooted to this spot, replaying every word they'd exchanged. He signaled the bartender for another drink, his thoughts drifting to the text from his assistant. Family info sparse, mother deceased, brother in the city, sparse. That word gnawed at him, a loose thread he couldn't resist tugging. Who was she, really? Beneath that warm smile and steady calm, what was she hiding? He leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, when the bar door swung open, and there she was. Jessica stepped in, her coat draped over her arm, her expression weary but alert. She hadn't left after all. She crossed to the counter, speaking quietly to the bartender. A request for coffee, he guessed, catching the faint nod of thanks she gave as a steaming mug was slid her way. She settled onto a stool a few seats down from him, oblivious to his presence, her shoulders slumping as she rubbed her temples. "Long night?" Brian asked, his voice cutting through the low hum of the bar. She startled, her head snapping up, then softened when she recognized him. "Brian, I thought you'd be asleep by now." "Not a chance," he said, sliding over to the stool beside her, uninvited but undeterred. "You're still here too. Overtime?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Something like that. Just helping out." He studied her, noting the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her jaw tensed for a split second before she forced a smile. "You don't strike me as the type who lives for extra shifts." She laughed, a tired sound. "You've known me for what, 6 hours? Already an expert?" "I'm a quick study," he shot back, leaning closer. "And you're avoiding the question." Her gaze flicked to his, sharp and assessing, then softened. "It's not a big deal, just picking up what I can. Life's expensive." There it was again, that crack in her armor, subtle but real. He wanted to press, to ask why she needed the money, what weighed on her so heavily, but the bartender interrupted, sliding a fresh coffee her way. "On the house, Jess. You look like you need it." "Thanks, Mike," she murmured, her gratitude genuine. She glanced at Brian, catching his curious stare. "What? Never seen a girl survive on caffeine before?" "Not one who makes it look this good," he said, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. She rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her lips. "You're relentless, aren't you?" "Part of my charm," he replied, grinning. "So, what's the plan? You gonna sit here all night, or do I get to keep you company?" She sipped her coffee, considering him over the rim. "You're a guest. I'm working. Pretty sure there's a line there." "Lines are made to be crossed," he said, his voice dropping, a challenge laced through it. She set the mug down, meeting his gaze head-on. "Not this one. I like my job too much to mess it up." "Fair enough," he conceded, though he didn't move away. "But I'm not letting you off that easy. Tell me something, anything. Favorite color, worst day. Give me a piece of you." Her brows lifted, surprised by the shift, but she humored him. "Blue, and I don't know. Maybe the day I spilled coffee on a guest's laptop. He wasn't happy." Brian laughed, loud and unguarded, drawing a few glances from the sparse crowd. "I'd pay to see that." "Yeah, well, it wasn't funny at the time," she said, but she was smiling now, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Your turn. Worst day?" He paused, the question catching him off guard. "Day I lost a deal I'd spent a year chasing. Felt like the ground dropped out from under me." She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't seem like the type who loses often." "I don't," he said, his grin returning. "Makes it worse when it happens." They fell into an easy rhythm, trading small truths, her love for old jazz records, his secret habit of sketching in meetings. The bar faded around them, the world shrinking to just the two of them, their voices weaving a fragile connection. But beneath it all, Brian felt the pull growing stronger, a need to know her, to protect that quiet strength she carried so effortlessly. An hour slipped by, the coffee cooling in her mug, when a man entered the bar. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp suit and a sharper edge to his movements, he scanned the room before settling his gaze on Brian. Jessica noticed first, her posture shifting subtly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "You know him?" Brian asked, following her line of sight. "No," she said, her voice low. "But he's been here before. Earlier tonight asking about a guest. Didn't like my answers." Brian's instincts kicked in, honed from years of navigating corporate sharks. The man approached, his stride too deliberate, his smile too tight. "Rodriguez," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Fancy running into you here." "Donovan," Brian replied, his tone cool but his body tensing. Paul Donovan, Grayson's attack dog, a business rival who'd been circling the acquisition like a vulture. "What brings you slumming it at my hotel?" "Just a drink," Donovan said, though his eyes glinted with intent. "Heard you were in town. Thought I'd say hello." Jessica watched the exchange, her fingers tightening on her mug. She didn't know the details, but she knew trouble when she saw it. Donovan's hand slipped into his pocket, pulling out a phone, and she caught the faint click of a camera shutter. Discreet, but not discreet enough. "Excuse me," she said, standing abruptly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Sir, no photography in here. Hotel policy." Donovan's smile faltered, his attention shifting to her. "Just a quick shot. No harm done." "It's not allowed," she insisted, stepping closer, her tone firm but polite. "I'll have to ask you to delete it." Brian watched, impressed and alarmed, as Donovan's expression hardened. "You're kidding, right? Do you know who I am?" I don't care who you are, she said, unflinching. Rules are rules. Delete it or I call security. Donovan sneered, but the threat landed. He swiped at his phone, muttering under his breath, then shot Brian a look. Enjoy your stay, Rodriguez. We'll talk soon. With that, he turned and stalked out, the door swinging shut behind him. Jessica exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she sat back down. Brian stared at her, a mix of awe and gratitude swelling in his chest. You have no idea what you just did for me, he said softly. She frowned, confused. I just thought you should know. That man wasn't here for good reasons. He wasn't, Brian agreed, his voice steady but his mind racing. Donovan had been fishing, likely for leverage, a photo to twist into a scandal, anything to derail the Grayson deal. Jessica had stopped him cold, without even knowing the stakes. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did, she said simply, shrugging. It's my job to look out for people here. He leaned closer, his gaze intense. Not like that. You don't even know me. I know enough, she replied, meeting his eyes. You're not the type who needs trouble sneaking up on you. He smiled, small but real. You're something else, Jessica. She ducked her head, the compliment landing heavier than she expected. Just doing what's right. The moment stretched, charged with unspoken weight, until her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, her face paling. Brian caught the shift, his curiosity sharpening. Everything okay? Yeah, she lied too quickly. Just family stuff. She stood, gathering her coat. I should go. Shift's over. Let me walk you out, he offered, rising with her. I'm fine, she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Really? Good night, Brian. He watched her leave, the revolving doors swallowing her into the night, and felt a pang he couldn't name. Back in his suite, he poured another drink, his mind spinning. Donovan's ambush had been a close call, but Jessica was the real shock. She'd saved him, no questions asked, no agenda. It was rare, that kind of purity, and it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. His phone lit up, his assistant again. Jessica Brown update. Overtime logs show she's pulling doubles all week. Hospital records pinged. Mother's alive, critical condition, uninsured. Brother's a wild card, possible debt issues. Dig deeper. Brian's grip tightened on the glass. Not deceased. Critical. The pieces clicked. Her exhaustion, the extra shifts, the guarded looks. She was drowning, and she hadn't let it show. Meanwhile, Jessica sat on the subway, her brother's latest text burning a hole in her pocket. Mom's worse. They're talking surgery. We're out of time. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back, staring at the blurred lights streaking past. She didn't know Brian Rodriguez was a billionaire, didn't know he was already turning her world upside down. And he didn't know that the woman who'd just saved him was fighting a battle she might not win. Jessica barely slept, the subway ride home a blur of flickering lights, and her brother's text replaying in her mind. Mom's worse. They're talking surgery. We're out of time. By the time she stumbled into her cramped Brooklyn apartment, dawn was creeping through the blinds, casting pale streaks across the worn floor. She collapsed onto the couch, her uniform still on, and stared at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down. Hospital bills, her mother's frail voice from their last call, the desperate edge in her brother's words. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not yet. Upstairs in his suite, Brian couldn't sleep either. The whiskey sat untouched now, his assistant's message glowing on his phone. Mother's alive, critical condition, uninsured. It explained everything. Jessica's exhaustion, the overtime, the quiet strain behind her smile. He paced the room, restless, the city's hum a distant roar beyond the glass. Donovan's ambush lingered in his thoughts, a sharp reminder of the stakes in his world, but it was Jessica who consumed him. She'd stepped in, fearless and unasked, and saved him from a mess she didn't even understand. He wanted to repay her. No, more than that. He wanted to know her. By morning, he'd made a decision. He dialed his assistant, voice clipped and decisive. "Call the Royal Crest manager. Jessica Brown gets the day off, full pay. No questions. And reserve the rooftop restaurant tonight. Private dinner. My name on it. Make it discreet." He hung up before the inevitable follow-up questions, his pulse quickening. It was bold, even for him, but Brian Rodriguez didn't second-guess. He acted. Jessica woke to her alarm blaring, the clock reading 10 a.m. Too late. She bolted upright, heart racing, scrambling for her phone. No missed calls from work. Strange. She showered in a rush, threw on her uniform, and headed to the hotel, her mind a tangle of worry, mom, money, and inexplicably, Brian's face flashing through it all. She arrived at the Royal Crest just past noon, her hair still damp, expecting the usual chaos of the front desk. Instead, the manager, Mr. Hargrove, greeted her with a rare smile. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" he asked, peering over his glasses. She frowned, adjusting her bag. "My shift? It starts at noon." "Not today," he said, shaking his head. "You've got the day off, paid in full. Some VIP guest pulled strings, left a note for you, too." He slid an envelope across the counter, her name scrawled in sharp, confident handwriting. She stared at it, suspicion prickling her skin. Paid. By who? Hargrove shrugged, already turning away. "Doesn't say, but there's an invitation in there. Dinner, rooftop restaurant, 7 p.m. Don't ask me details. I'm just the messenger." Her stomach flipped. She tore open the envelope, finding a simple card. Dinner tonight. Rooftop. No uniform required. B. Brian. It had to be. She clutched the note, torn between irritation and a flicker of curiosity. Who did he think he was, rearranging her life like this? And yet, a day off, paid, with her mother's bills looming, it was a lifeline she couldn't ignore. The day stretched strangely without work. She visited the hospital, sitting by her mother's bedside, the beep of machines a grim soundtrack. Her mother, pale and fragile, squeezed her hand weakly. "You look tired, Jess. Take care of yourself, too." Jessica forced a smile, promising she would, but the lie tasted bitter. Her brother arrived, tense and unshaven, muttering about loans and favors he couldn't repay. They didn't resolve anything, just sat in heavy silence until visiting hours ended. By 6:30, Jessica stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection. She'd pulled on a simple black dress, nothing fancy, but it hugged her frame in a way that felt intentional. Her hair fell loose, waves brushing her shoulders, and she debated canceling. This was crazy. She didn't know Brian, not really. But that spark in his eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was more than a receptionist, it pulled her toward the hotel, despite herself. She arrived at the rooftop restaurant at 7:05, the elevator ride a slow climb that mirrored the knot in her chest. The doors opened to a breathtaking view, New York's skyline glittering under a twilight sky, the air crisp with a hint of autumn. A single table sat near the edge, lit by soft candles, and there he was. Brian stood as she approached, his suit traded for a dark sweater and slacks, casual but sharp, his presence commanding even here. "Jessica," he said, his voice warm, a smile tugging at his lips. "You came." She stopped a few feet away, narrowing her eyes. "You planned this, didn't you?" "Guilty," he admitted, smirking as he pulled out a chair for her. "But only because I wanted to spend time with you outside of a hotel lobby." She hesitated, her arms crossing instinctively. "You can't just buy me a day off and expect me to play along." "I didn't buy it," he said, his tone softening. "I asked a favor. Big difference. Sit. Please. Her resolve wavered, the please catching her off guard. She slid into the chair, eyeing him warily as he sat across from her. What's this about, Brian? Really? He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze steady. You saved me last night. That guy, Donovan, he's trouble and you stopped him without blinking. I don't meet people like you often. She shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of his words. I was just doing my job. No, he countered, firm but gentle. You went beyond that, and I wanted to say thank you, properly. A waiter appeared, pouring wine she hadn't ordered, setting plates of food that smelled divine. Roasted chicken, truffle risotto, things she'd never splurge on. She glanced at Brian, raising a brow. You're really pulling out all the stops, huh? Only the best, he said, grinning. You deserve it. She took a sip of wine, the richness surprising her, and decided to test him. Okay, Mr. VIP, what's your deal? Why all this for me? He paused, twirling his glass, then met her eyes. I'm not good at half measures. I see something I want, I go for it. And you're not like anyone I've met. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her tone light. Flattery's nice, but I'm not some prize to win. Didn't say you were, he replied, leaning back. You're a puzzle, one I'm trying to figure out. She laughed, sharp and genuine. Good luck with that. I'm not that interesting. I disagree, he said, his voice dropping, a challenge sparking in his eyes. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's nothing behind that smile. Her breath caught, his words slicing too close. She looked away out at the city, the lights blurring as her guard wavered. You don't know me, Brian. Then let me, he said, softer now, almost pleading. One dinner, no strings. She turned back, searching his face. There was no arrogance there, not tonight. Just a man who, for once, wasn't entirely in control. Fine, she said finally. One dinner. The meal unfolded slowly, their conversation weaving through safe topics, her love for jazz, his unexpected talent for sketching, then dipping into deeper waters. She admitted she'd grown up in Queens, her dad gone early, her mom the rock until sickness took hold. He shared fragments of his own story, ruthless ambition, a childhood of scraping by, a life built from nothing. They laughed, they sparred, and with each passing minute, the rooftop felt less like a stage and more like a sanctuary. An hour in, he reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You're tougher than you let on, Jessica. She didn't pull away, though her heart thudded. You don't get a choice sometimes. Life just happens. Yeah, he murmured, his thumb grazing her knuckles. But you don't have to face it alone. Her eyes snapped to his, the words landing heavy. What's that supposed to mean? He hesitated, then pulled back, breaking the moment. Just, I'm here, if you need me. She didn't respond, the air thick with what he didn't say, what she couldn't ask. The night stretched on, dessert arriving, chocolate torte, decadent and sweet, and they lingered over it, the city a silent witness. By 9 p.m., the plates were cleared, and Jessica stood, smoothing her dress. This was nice, she admitted, reluctant but honest. Unexpected, but nice. Glad I could surprise you, he said, rising too, his smile warm. Can I walk you down? She nodded, and they rode the elevator in silence, the tension between them softer now, less jagged. At the lobby, she turned to him. Thanks, Brian, for tonight. Anytime, he said, and meant it. She stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face, her mind a whirl of him. His voice, his touch, the way he'd seen her. Back in his suite, Brian stood at the window, watching her disappear into the night, his phone buzzing with a new text. Donovan's digging. Watch your back. The game was still on, but for once it wasn't the deal that mattered. It was her. Jessica stepped out of the elevator into the crisp night air, her black dress swaying slightly as she crossed the hotel's grand entrance. The dinner lingered in her mind. Brian's easy grin, the way his hand had brushed hers, the quiet intensity of his gaze. She pulled her coat tighter, the city's pulse thrumming around her, and hailed a cab. Inside, she leaned her head against the window, replaying the evening. It had been a setup, sure, but one she couldn't resent. Not entirely. There was something about him, something that tugged at her despite her better judgment. Back on the rooftop, Brian lingered by the table, the candles flickering out one by one as the staff cleared away the remnants of their meal. He slipped his hands into his pockets, staring at the skyline, but his thoughts were on her, her sharp wit, the way she'd softened when he least expected it. His phone buzzed again, Donovan's name flashing briefly before he silenced it. The game with Grayson could wait. Tonight, for the first time in years, something else felt more urgent. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the hotel, her shift starting at noon as usual. She'd barely slept, her mother's condition and Brian's unexpected kindness warring for space in her head. She tied her apron behind the desk, forcing herself into work mode when Brian appeared. Earlier than she'd expected, his presence filling the lobby like he owned it. Which, she supposed, he practically could. "Morning, Jessica," he said, leaning against the counter with that same disarming grin. "Miss me?" She rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her lips. "You're back already? Don't you have a company to run?" "Perks of being the boss," he replied, his voice smooth. "I make my own schedule. Thought I'd check in. See if you survived my cooking." She laughed, shaking her head. "It was hardly your cooking. And I'm fine, thanks. You don't need to keep tabs on me." "Maybe I want to," he said, his tone shifting softer now. "You're hard to forget." Her breath caught, but she masked it with a playful jab. "I have to say you're more charming when you're not pretending to need room details." He smirked, leaning closer. "And you're even more beautiful outside the reception desk." The compliment landed, warm and unexpected, and she busied herself with a stack of papers to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "Flattery won't get you a discount, Mr. Rodriguez." "Brian," he corrected, his eyes locked on hers. "And I'm not looking for a discount. Just your time." She paused, meeting his gaze, the air between them humming with something electric. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." "Part of my charm," he echoed from their bar conversation, winking. "How about lunch?" "No rooftops, no tricks, just food." "You picked the place?" She hesitated, her mind flashing to her mother, the bills, the weight she carried. But his sincerity, unpolished, real, chipped away at her walls. "Maybe," she said finally, "if I can get a break." "I'll wait," he replied, and the way he said it, steady and sure, made her believe he would. An hour later, they sat in a small diner 2 blocks from the hotel, a place Jessica loved for its greasy fries and jukebox humming in the corner. She'd chosen it to test him, see if the billionaire could handle a cracked vinyl booth and a $5 burger. He did, sliding in across from her without a hint of discomfort, his sweater rolled up to his elbows, his laugh easy as she teased him about ketchup on his sleeve. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, dipping a fry in her shake, a habit he raised a brow at but didn't question. "Good or bad?" he asked, stealing a fry from her plate. "Good," she said, smirking as she swatted his hand. "I figured you'd be, I don't know, arrogant, cold, like those guys in suits who yell at me for things I can't control." He leaned back, studying her. "I can be arrogant, but not with you. You don't let me get away with it." She grinned, liking that answer more than she'd admit. "Guess I'm special then." "You are," he said, no trace of a joke in his voice, and the weight of it settled between them. They talked for an hour, About her childhood sneaking into jazz clubs, his sketching habit he'd picked up to stay sane in endless meetings. He listened, really listened, his questions digging deeper than small talk, and she found herself opening up about her dad leaving, her mom's strength, even the diner's fries being her comfort food after bad days. He didn't push, didn't pry, just absorbed it all with a quiet intensity that made her feel seen. Back at the hotel, Brian lingered in the lobby as she returned to her shift, watching her slip behind the desk with that same grace he'd noticed the first day. His phone buzzed. Charles, his personal assistant. His voice clipped through the line. "Sir, I've got Donovan's latest move tracked. He's sniffing around Grayson's board, but this thing with the receptionist, it's a risk. She's too ordinary. No connections, no leverage. You sure about this?" Brian's jaw tightened, his eyes on Jessica as she smiled at a guest. "She's not ordinary, Charles, and I don't care what you think. Drop it." Charles sighed, a rare crack in his professionalism. "Your call, boss. Just don't say I didn't warn you." Brian hung up, shoving the phone in his pocket. Ordinary. The word grated on him. Jessica wasn't ordinary. She was fire wrapped in calm, strength he couldn't buy or bully. He didn't care about leverage or connections. He cared about her. Later, as her shift neared its end, he caught her in the staff room on her break, sipping coffee, her eyes tired but bright. "Hey," he said, leaning in the doorway. "You okay?" She nodded, setting the mug down. "Yeah, long day. You?" "Better now," he said, stepping closer. "You're good at this, handling everything. Makes me wonder what you're not telling me." Her smile faltered, a shadow crossing her face. "Not much to tell. Just life." He didn't buy it, but he didn't push. Instead, he sat across from her, their knees brushing under the table. "You ever get tired of being the strong one?" Her breath hitched, his question slicing too close. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not like I can stop." "You don't have to," he said, his hand finding hers, warm and steady. "Not with me." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment the walls she'd built trembled. "You're trouble, Brian Rodriguez." "Only the best kind," he teased, squeezing her hand. She laughed, soft and unguarded, and the sound hooked him deeper. They sat there, the clock ticking past her break, neither pulling away. Outside, the city churned, Donovan plotting, her brother texting again. Surgeries scheduled. "We need cash, Jess." The hospital waiting like a guillotine. But in that small room, it was just them, the attraction tightening its grip, undeniable and alive. 2 hours had woven their bond tighter, his defiance of Charles, her slow surrender to his warmth. He wasn't the billionaire she'd feared, and she wasn't the puzzle he'd first chased. They were more, and the world beyond them was closing in. Donovan's schemes, her family's crisis, secrets still unspoken. The diner's jukebox faded, the coffee cooled, but the spark between them burned brighter, teetering on the edge of something neither could walk away from. Jessica leaned back in the staff room chair, Brian's hand still warm against hers, his thumb tracing absent circles over her knuckles. The air between them felt charged, a quiet intimacy settling in after their diner lunch and the stolen moments of her break. His laugh, low and genuine, echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the polished billionaires she'd always pictured barking orders over the phone. He was different with her, softer, and it stirred something she wasn't ready to name. "You're staring," she teased, pulling her hand back to sip her cold coffee, though her smile betrayed her. "Can't help it," Brian replied, leaning forward, his smirk playful but his eyes serious. "You're distracting." She rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her chest grew. "You're the one who keeps showing up. I'm just trying to work here." "Work's overrated," he said, standing as her break ended. I'll see you later, Jessica. Don't disappear on me. No promises, she shot back, but as he left, she felt the pull, undeniable, steady, like a tide she couldn't outrun. The rest of her shift blurred by, guests and paperwork fading into the background as her thoughts split between Brian's easy charm and her brother's latest text. Surgeries tomorrow. $20,000 short. Help. Her stomach knotted, the numbers a weight she couldn't lift alone. She clocked out at 8 p.m., exhaustion tugging at her, and checked her phone as she stepped into the lobby. A new message waited, not from her brother, but an unknown number. Her breath caught as she opened it. Stay away from Brian Rodriguez, or you'll regret it. The words hit like ice water, sharp and sudden. She froze, rereading it, her pulse hammering. A prank? A mistake? But the specificity, Brian's name, made it feel too real. She glanced around the lobby, half expecting someone to be watching, but it was just the usual hum of late-night guests. Her hands trembled as she shoved the phone into her bag, hurrying to the subway, the threat looping in her mind. Upstairs, Brian sat in his suite, sketching idly on a notepad, a habit he rarely indulged anymore. The lines formed her face, Jessica's eyes, her smile, without him fully realizing it. His phone buzzed, pulling him back. Charles again. Sinclair's on the move. Word is he's pissed about Grayson. Thinks you're distracted. Brian's jaw tightened. Raymond Sinclair, another rival, older, Kajier with a grudge that stretched back years. The Grayson deal had put Brian in his crosshairs, but this felt different, personal. He tossed the sketch aside, pacing to the window. Distracted. Maybe he was. Jessica had shifted something in him, pulled his focus from the relentless grind of his world. He didn't regret it, not yet, but Sinclair wouldn't hesitate to exploit it. His phone buzzed again, this time a call from his security head, Victor. Boss, we've got chatter. Sinclair's digging into your personal life. Hotel staff, specifically. You need to lock this down. Staff? Brian's voice sharpened. Jessica. Not confirmed, Victor said, cautious. But if he's sniffing around the hotel, she's a target. You've been seen with her. Brian's grip tightened on the phone, a surge of anger flaring hot. Find out. Now and get me eyes on Sinclair. He hung up, the room suddenly too small, his mind racing. Jessica wasn't just a distraction. She was a vulnerability, one Sinclair could weaponize. He grabbed his coat, heading downstairs. He needed to see her, warn her, something. But she was already gone. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the hotel, the anonymous message a shadow she couldn't shake. She'd barely slept, jumping at every creak in her apartment. The words, "You'll regret it," burned into her thoughts. She tied her apron with unsteady hands, forcing a smile for the early guests, when Brian stormed into the lobby, his usual calm replaced by a coiled intensity. "Jessica," he said, his voice low but urgent, pulling her aside. "We need to talk." She frowned, his tone setting her on edge. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, scanning the room before meeting her eyes. "Someone's targeting me. A rival. Raymond Sinclair. He's dangerous, and I think he's coming after you to get to me." Her stomach dropped, the message flashing in her mind. "What? Why me?" "Because of this," he said, gesturing between them, frustration lacing his words. "Us. I've been different since I met you. He sees it. And now—" He stopped, pulling out his phone, showing her a photo Victor had sent. A grainy shot of Sinclair's known fixer leaving the hotel the night before. She paled, her voice trembling. "I got a text last night, anonymous. It said to stay away from you, or I'd regret it." Brian's face darkened, fury igniting in his eyes. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know what it was," she snapped, fear sharpening her tone. "I thought it was a joke. Until now." He stepped closer, his hands balling into fists. No one threatens someone I care about. No one. The words landed heavy, protective, and fierce, but they didn't ease the terror clawing at her. Brian, I don't know how to deal with this. I'm not part of your world. You are now, he said, softer but firm, and I'm not letting anything happen to you. She shook her head, stepping back. You don't get it. I've got enough. My mom's surgery, my brother, everything. I can't handle this too. He reached for her, his touch gentle despite the storm in his eyes. Let me help, please. Sinclair's my problem. I'll fix it. How? She demanded, tears pricking her eyes. What am I supposed to do? Just wait for the next threat? No, he said, his voice steadying. You stay with me. I've got people, security, resources. He won't touch you. She stared at him, torn between the safety he offered and the chaos he brought. I don't want your protection, Brian. I want my life back. His jaw clenched, pain flickering across his face. I didn't mean to drag you into this, but I'm in too deep to walk away now. The lobby buzzed around them, oblivious to the tension, as her phone buzzed again. Another message. Last warning. Leave him. She showed it to Brian, her hands shaking, and his fury flared anew. Victor's on it, he said, dialing his security head. We're tracing this. Sinclair's done. But what if he's not? She whispered, terror gripping her. What if he gets to me, or my family? He won't, Brian vowed, pulling her close despite her resistance. I swear it. She let him hold her, the fight draining out as fear took root. An hour passed, Brian coordinating with Victor, phone traces, hotel footage, a plan to corner Sinclair, while Jessica sat numbly at the desk, her world tilting. Another message came. You were warned. Attached was a photo, her brother slumped outside a bar, blood on his shirt. She gasped, showing Brian, who cursed under his breath. That's it. You're not leaving my sight. I have to go to him, she said, panic rising. He's hurt. We'll get him, Brian cut in, already dialing. Victor's sending a team. Hospital now. The next hour unfolded in a blur. Brian's people retrieving her brother, beaten but alive, the hospital confirming he'd been jumped, a message carved into the act. Back off, Rodriguez. Jessica sat by his bedside, her brother groggy but stable, while Brian stood guard, his anger a quiet inferno. This ends tonight, he told her, his voice steel. Sinclair's mine. She looked up, tears streaking her face. I'm scared, Brian. I know, he said, kneeling beside her, his hand on hers. But I've got you. Both of you. The sterile scent of antiseptic sharp in her nose, the beeping monitors a relentless pulse in the quiet. His bruised face, swollen, stitched, a silent testament to Sinclair's reach, stared back at her, a mirror of her own fear. Brian hovered near the door, his presence a storm barely contained, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders to Victor. Lock it down. I want Sinclair's every move tracked now. His voice was steel, but his eyes, when they met hers, softened with a desperation she couldn't face. The latest threat? You were warned, and the photo of her brother bleeding had shattered something in her. She'd clung to Brian's strength in the chaos, but now, with the hospital lights casting harsh clarity, the weight of it all crashed down. Her mother's surgery loomed hours away. Her brother lay broken, and Sinclair's shadow stretched further than she'd imagined. Brian was the eye of this hurricane, and she was caught in its pull. I'm stepping out, she muttered, brushing past him, her voice trembling. He followed, catching her arm gently in the hall. Jessica, wait, he said, his tone urgent. Where are you going? She pulled free, turning to face him, tears brimming. I need air, I don't know. This... She gestured vaguely at him, the hospital, the invisible threat. It's too much. His face tightened, but he didn't back off. I'm handling it. Sinclair won't touch you again. Again? She snapped, her voice cracking. He already has, Brian. My brother's here because of you. The words hit him like a blow, and he flinched, guilt flickering in his eyes. I didn't want this. You know that. Maybe not, she said, softer now, tears spilling over. But it's happening, and I can't be in your world. It's too much. He stepped closer, desperation clawing at his calm. You don't have to be in my world, just let me be in yours. Please, Jessica, I can fix this. She shook her head, stepping back, the distance between them growing. You can't fix everything, not this. I need to protect what's left of my life, and that means walking away. His jaw clenched, a crack forming in his unshakable facade. Don't do this. I need you. You don't need me, she whispered, her voice breaking. You need control, and I can't give you that. She turned, her footsteps echoing down the sterile corridor as she fled, away from him, from the danger, from the pull that still tugged at her heart. Brian stood frozen, watching her go, his hands balled into fists. For the first time in his life, he'd been rejected, raw, undeniable, and it splintered something deep inside him. He'd built an empire, bent the world to his will, but he couldn't hold on to her. Back in her apartment, Jessica sank onto the couch, the silence deafening after the hospital's chaos. Her phone buzzed, her brother, stable, her mother, prepped for surgery, but no word from Brian. She'd shut him out, and it hurt more than she'd expected. The threats lingered, Sinclair's shadow, a cold grip, but it was Brian's voice, let me be in yours, that haunted her most. She curled into herself, tears soaking the cushion, terrified she'd made the wrong choice, but too scared to turn back. Brian returned to his suite, the city sprawling below, indifferent to the fracture in his chest. He poured a whiskey, the glass trembling in his hand, and downed it in one burn. Charles called, his voice cautious. Sinclair's gone quiet. Too quiet. What's the play, boss? Find him, Brian growled, his voice rough. End this. And the girl, Charles pressed. She's gone, he said, the words cutting deeper than he'd admit. Focus on Sinclair. He hung up, staring at the sketch of Jessica on the table. Her eyes, her smile, now a ghost of what he'd lost. He'd never been rejected, never felt this powerless. The Grayson deal, Sinclair's threats, his empire, it all paled next to her absence. He slammed the glass down, shattering it, the shards a mirror to the break inside him. An hour ticked by, Jessica wrestling with her choice, Brian unraveling in his own way. Her mother's surgery began, a lifeline she clung to, while Brian mobilized his team, Victor tracing Sinclair's fixer, a confrontation brewing. The threats hadn't stopped. A new message hit Jessica's phone. You can't run. She deleted it, trembling, but didn't call Brian. He, meanwhile, stood at his window, the city a battlefield, vowing to crush Sinclair. Not for the deal, but for her, even if she'd never know. Jessica sat alone in her apartment, the silence pressing in as the days stretched on without a sign of Brian. Her mother's surgery had gone well, stable, recovering, but the relief was overshadowed by the void he'd left. She'd pushed him away, convinced it was the only way to shield herself from Sinclair's reach, from the chaos of his world. Her brother, still healing, had moved in temporarily, his presence a quiet comfort, but her thoughts kept drifting to Brian, his desperate plea, the crack in his voice. She'd checked her phone too many times, expecting nothing, finding nothing. He was gone, she told herself. He'd moved on. At the hotel, her shifts felt hollow. The lobby buzzed as always, but without his shadow leaning against the counter, it was just noise. She'd catch herself glancing at the elevator, half hoping, then bury the thought. Sinclair's threats had stopped, No messages, no photos. But the unease lingered, a ghost she couldn't shake. She'd won her life back, or so she told herself, but it didn't feel like victory. Brian, meanwhile, had vanished from the royal crest, retreating to his penthouse across the city. The suite sat empty, his sketches of Jessica abandoned on the table, the broken glass swept away, but the fracture in him untouched. He'd thrown himself into the hunt for Sinclair, Victor's team tracking leads, pinning the fixer to a string of shell companies. The Grayson deal hung in the balance, but it was secondary now. He worked in silence, fury and loss fueling him, her rejection a wound he couldn't cauterize. Charles watched, wary but silent, knowing better than to push. 4 days after she'd walked away, an envelope arrived at Jessica's apartment, slipped under her door. Her name was written in that same sharp, confident script she'd seen on the rooftop invitation. Inside, a card. Gala. Friday, 8 p.m. The Met. Brian Rodriguez, host. Her heart stuttered. A gala? After everything? She traced the letters, torn between tossing it and clutching it. Closure, she decided. She'd go, see him one last time, and end this pull between them for good. Friday night, she stepped into the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the grand hall awash in gold light and the hum of New York's elite. Her dress, deep blue, borrowed from a friend, hugged her frame, simple but striking. She felt out of place among the glittering crowd, their laughter and clinking glasses a world apart from her own. She scanned the room, nerves twisting, until she saw him. Brian stood near the center, a black tuxedo sharpening his edges, his presence magnetic, even in a sea of power. He was speaking to a guest, his smile practiced, but his eyes found hers across the room, locking on with an intensity that stole her breath. The guest faded away as he excused himself, cutting through the crowd toward her. "Jessica," he said, stopping a foot away, his voice low, rough with something unspoken. "You came." She lifted her chin, steadying herself. "I figured it was time to say goodbye properly." His face flickered, pain, maybe hope. But he masked it fast. "Not yet," he said, holding out his hand. "One dance. If you still want to walk away after this, I won't stop you." She stared at his hand, the offer hanging heavy. A trap, her mind warned. His world, his rules. But her heart, traitor that it was, urged her forward. "One dance," she agreed, her voice barely audible, and placed her hand in his. He pulled her close, his grip firm but gentle, guiding her to the floor as a slow waltz swelled from the orchestra. The room blurred, the crowd fading until it was just them, his hand on her waist, hers, her hand on his shoulder, their steps sinking effortlessly. She felt the heat of him, the steady beat of his pulse under her fingers, and hated how right it felt. "You disappeared," she said, her voice soft, accusing. "I needed space," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "To fix things. Sinclair's done. Arrested this morning. You're safe now." Her breath caught, relief warring with doubt. "That's it? It's over?" "For you, yeah," he said, his thumb brushing her waist. "I made sure of it." She searched his face, finding no lie. "Why this?" "The gala?" He smiled, small and real. "A second chance. I couldn't let you go without trying one more time." Her throat tightened, tears threatening. "Brian, Don't," he cut in, softer. "Just dance with me. Decide after." They moved together, the music wrapping them in a fragile bubble, her walls crumbling with every step. An hour slipped by, the gala humming around them, but they stayed locked in that dance, two souls teetering on the edge. When the song ended, he didn't let go, his hand lingering. "Well?" he asked, voice raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. She swallowed, torn between the safety of her old life and the risk of his. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I'm here." His grip tightened, a flicker of hope igniting. That's enough for now." The night stretched on, their dance a quiet promise, but shadows lingered. Sinclair's arrest too neat, a loose thread Victor hadn't caught. 2 hours had spun their tale, a reunion, a gamble. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. Jessica's hand lingered in Brian's as the final notes of the waltz faded, the gala's golden glow casting soft shadows across his face. The crowd swirled around them, a sea of tuxedos and gowns, but their small island of silence held firm. His words, "That's enough for now," echoed in her chest, a lifeline she wasn't sure she could grab. She pulled back slightly, her fingers slipping from his, but his gaze kept her anchored, searching, waiting. "You're still here," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, though his eyes betrayed the stakes. "I am," she replied, her voice unsteady. "But I don't know what that means yet." Before he could answer, a ripple moved through the room, heads turning, whispers rising. Brian's posture shifted, alert as Victor approached, his face grim but triumphant. "It's time, boss," he said, low enough for only them to hear. "Sinclair's here. We've got him." Jessica frowned, confusion tightening her grip on Brian's arm. "What's happening?" He turned to her, his expression hardening with resolve. "Closure. For both of us." The orchestra paused, and Brian stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the murmurs. The crowd parted as he took the center of the room, his voice carrying with the authority that had built his empire. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you need to know, something I need to set right." Jessica watched, pulse racing, as he gestured to Victor. A screen descended behind him, flickering to life with grainy footage, security tapes, emails, voice recordings. The room hushed, eyes widening as Raymond Sinclair's face appeared, his voice cold and clipped. "Rodriguez is distracted. The girl's the key. Make it hurt." Another clip, Sinclair's fixer outside the hotel, then her brother's attack, timestamps matching the threats she'd received. "This man," Brian said, pointing to the screen, "tried to destroy me, not just my business, but someone I care about. Raymond Sinclair orchestrated blackmail, assault, and intimidation. He threatened Jessica Brown, a woman whose only crime was crossing my path." Gasps rippled through the gala, heads turning to Jessica, who stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. Brian's eyes found hers, steady and fierce. He's done. Tonight, he faces the consequences. As if on cue, the double doors swung open, and Sinclair strode in, gray-haired, sharp-suited, arrogance radiating, only to falter as federal agents flanked him, badges flashing. "Raymond Sinclair," one announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, assault, and extortion." His protests echoed as they cuffed him, the crowd parting in stunned silence as he was led out, his glare cutting to Brian, then Jessica, before disappearing. The room erupted, applause, whispers, chaos, but Brian crossed back to her, ignoring it all. "It's over," he said, his voice low, just for her. "He can't touch you anymore." She stared at him, the gala fading to a hum, her mind reeling. Sinclair's threats, her brother's blood, the fear that had driven her away. It was gone, dismantled in front of her. And Brian had done it, not for his deal, not for power, but for her. Tears welled, her breath shaky as the truth hit. "I thought I was saving myself from heartbreak," she said softly, stepping closer, her voice breaking. "But I think I was breaking my own heart." His face softened, a smile breaking through the tension. "Then let me fix it." He reached for her, and this time she didn't pull away. Her hand found his, fingers lacing tight, and he pulled her into him, his arms wrapping around her like a shield. The crowd blurred, the gala's noise a distant roar as she pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, real. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured, her voice muffled against him. "Yeah, I did," he replied, his lips brushing her hair. You're worth it, Jessica. She tilted her head up, meeting his eyes, and saw everything. Relief, longing, a promise. I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I let you, he said, his thumb brushing her cheek, wiping away a tear. But I'm not letting go now. She smiled, small but true, and leaned up, kissing him, soft, tentative, then deeper as the fear melted away. The gala spun on, oblivious, but for them, time stopped, 2 hours of tension unraveling into something new. Sinclair was gone, the danger lifted, and in its place stood a chance, a fragile, beautiful beginning. Jessica pulled back from the kiss, her lips tingling, Brian's arms still wrapped around her as the gala's hum pulsed in the background. The weight of Sinclair's arrest, of the threats dissolving into nothing, left her dizzy, but it was Brian's steady presence that grounded her. His hand lingered on her cheek, his smile soft but triumphant, and for the first time in days, she felt the knot in her chest loosen. The crowd milled around them, oblivious to the quiet seismic shift between them. But she didn't care. She'd almost lost this, lost him, to fear. You okay? He asked, his voice low, thumb brushing her jaw. She nodded, a laugh escaping her, shaky but real. Yeah, better than okay. Good, he said, stepping back but keeping her hand in his. Because I've got one more thing to show you. Her brow furrowed, curiosity sparking. What now? You've already taken down a villain in front of half of New York. He grinned, a glint in his eyes. Trust me, you'll like this. An hour later, they were in his car, a sleek black thing that purred through the city streets, heading away from the Met. Jessica leaned against the window, the gala's glow fading behind them, her blue dress catching the street lights. Where are we going? She asked, glancing at him. You'll see, he said, his tone teasing but warm, his hand resting casually on the gear shift. The hospital loomed ahead, its stark white facade a jolt after the evening's glamour. Jessica tensed, confusion tightening her grip on the seat. Brian, why? He parked, cutting the engine, and turned to her, his expression softening. Come with me. She followed, her heels clicking on the pavement, unease mixing with trust as he led her inside. The halls were quiet, the night shift staff moving with practiced calm, and he guided her to a private wing she hadn't seen before. Polished floors, soft lighting, a world apart from the overcrowded rooms her mother had been in. He stopped at a door, nodding for her to enter. Inside, her mother sat propped up in bed, awake, her color better than Jessica had seen in months. A nurse adjusted an IV, and a tray of fresh fruit sat on the table, small signs of care that hadn't been there before. Jessica froze, her breath catching. Mom? She whispered, crossing to her side. Jess, her mother said, her voice stronger, a smile breaking through. They moved me here yesterday. Best doctors, they said. Everything's paid for, surgery, recovery, all of it. Jessica turned to Brian, who leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, watching her with quiet intensity. You did this? She asked, her voice trembling. He shrugged, almost sheepish. I made a few calls. After you told me about her, I couldn't just do nothing. Tears welled, her chest tight with gratitude and something deeper. I don't know how to thank you. He stepped closer, grinning that easy, disarming grin. Dinner at the rooftop. She laughed, the sound bursting free, bright and unguarded, and threw her arms around him. He caught her, pulling her close, his laugh rumbling against her. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured into her hair. Her mother watched, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. He's a keeper, Jess. Yeah, Jessica said, pulling back to look at him, her eyes shining. I think he is. Later that night, they stood on the Royal Crest's rooftop, the same table from their first date, set with candles, the city sprawling beneath them in a sea of lights. The air was cool, the tension of the past weeks gone, replaced by a quiet joy. Jessica leaned against the railing, her dress fluttering in the breeze, and Brian joined her, his arms slipping around her waist. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, glancing up at him. "The hospital, the gala." "I wanted to," he cut in, his voice steady. "You deserve it, Jessica, more than you know." She turned to him, her hand resting on his chest. "I was so scared of losing myself in you, but I think I found something instead." He smiled, leaning down, his forehead touching hers. "Me too." Their lips met, slow and sure, the city lights framing them in a perfect glow. And that, my beautiful story family, is the end of this incredible love story. Thank you for being part of this amazing journey. Your support, likes, and comments mean the world to me. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay safe, stay kind, and keep believing in love.